In this video, we will talk about the Cuban Missile Crisis, analyze the 13-day confrontation that brought the world close to nuclear war. So make sure to watch the full video. The Cuban Missile Crisis was a tense 13-day standoff between the US and the Soviet Union in October 1962. It brought the world dangerously close to nuclear war. With diplomacy, strategic decisions, and high-stakes negotiations, both sides avoided catastrophe, leaving behind crucial lessons for international conflict resolution and nuclear diplomacy. 1. Origins of the Cuban Missile Crisis. Cold War tensions rise. The Cuban Missile Crisis was rooted in the Cold War rivalry between the United States and the Soviet Union. After the failed Bay of Pigs invasion in 1961, Fidel Castro sought Soviet protection against future U.S. aggression. Meanwhile, the U.S. was concerned about Soviet expansion and the spread of communism. In response to U.S. nuclear missiles stationed in Turkey and Italy, Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev decided to deploy nuclear weapons in Cuba. This strategic move heightened global tensions, bringing the world closer to the brink of war. The stage was set for a dramatic confrontation that would test both superpowers. 2. The discovery. U.S. surveillance reveals Soviet missiles in Cuba. On October 14, 1962, an American U-2 reconnaissance plane captured photographic evidence of Soviet ballistic missile sites under construction in Cuba. These missiles, capable of reaching major U.S. cities within minutes, posed an immediate national security threat. President John F. Kennedy and his advisors, known as the Executive Committee of the National Security Council, (ExComm), debated their response. The discovery shocked the world, as tensions between the US and the Soviet Union escalated to dangerous levels. The presence of nuclear weapons just 90 miles from Florida created a crisis that demanded swift and decisive action. 3. Kennedy's response. The naval blockade and military readiness. After intense discussions, President Kennedy announced a naval blockade, or quarantine, of Cuba on October 22, 1962. The blockade aimed to prevent further Soviet missile shipments while pressuring Khrushchev to remove the existing weapons. Meanwhile, the U.S. military was placed on DEFCON 2, the highest level of readiness short of war. The world watched anxiously as Soviet ships approached the blockade line, risking a direct military confrontation. While the blockade was a bold move, it also allowed room for diplomatic negotiations, avoiding an immediate escalation into nuclear war. 4. The Soviet perspective. Khrushchev's strategic gamble. For Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev, placing missiles in Cuba was both a defensive and strategic decision. He sought to protect Cuba from U.S. invasion while counterbalancing American nuclear missiles stationed in Europe. Khrushchev believed that deploying missiles in the Western Hemisphere would strengthen Soviet bargaining power. However, he underestimated the intensity of the U.S. reaction. As tensions escalated, he faced a critical choice: risk nuclear war or find a diplomatic solution. The Soviet leader found himself in a high-stakes standoff with Kennedy, with the fate of the world hanging in the balance. 5. The 13 Days of Crisis. A world on the brink of war. The Cuban Missile Crisis lasted from October 16 to October 28, 1962, a period of extreme tension known as the 13 Days. Every decision was crucial, as even a minor miscalculation could have triggered nuclear war. Secret communications between Washington and Moscow intensified, while the world held its breath. U.S. military forces remained on high alert, and Soviet submarines carrying nuclear torpedoes patrolled the Atlantic. The possibility of direct conflict loomed large, as neither side wanted to appear weak. Diplomacy, military strategy, and psychological warfare all played key roles in this unprecedented global standoff. 6. The turning point. Secret negotiations and back-channel diplomacy. As the crisis escalated, both Kennedy and Khrushchev sought a way to de-escalate without appearing to surrender. Secret back-channel discussions between U.S. Attorney General Robert Kennedy and Soviet Ambassador Anatoly Dobrynin helped shape a potential resolution. On October 26, Khrushchev sent a letter proposing that the Soviet Union would withdraw its missiles from Cuba in exchange for a U.S. guarantee not to invade Cuba. The next day, a second, more aggressive letter demanded the removal of U.S. missiles from Turkey as well. The delicate balance of diplomacy and military pressure would ultimately determine the crisis's outcome. 7. Resolution. The deal that ended the crisis. On October 28, 1962, Khrushchev announced that the Soviet Union would remove its missiles from Cuba in exchange for a U.S. public declaration and private assurance not to invade Cuba. Additionally, Kennedy secretly agreed to remove American missiles from Turkey, though this part of the deal was not publicly disclosed at the time. The resolution marked a major diplomatic victory, averting nuclear war. While both superpowers claimed success, the crisis demonstrated the dangers of nuclear brinkmanship. It also underscored the importance of direct communication between the US and the Soviet Union in preventing future conflicts. 8. The aftermath, consequences and lessons learned. The Cuban Missile Crisis left a lasting impact on global politics. It exposed the fragility of Cold War diplomacy and the catastrophic risks of nuclear escalation. As a result, both superpowers took steps to reduce future tensions. The crisis led to the establishment of the Moscow-Washington Hotline, a direct communication link between the White House and the Kremlin. It also encouraged arms control agreements, including the Partial Nuclear Test Ban Treaty in 1963. The experience reinforced the importance of careful diplomacy and crisis management in a world increasingly defined by nuclear weapons. 9. Impact on US and Soviet leadership. The crisis had profound effects on the political careers of both Kennedy and Khrushchev. Kennedy emerged with increased global prestige, praised for his measured and strategic handling of the crisis. However, the ordeal deepened his distrust of military advisors and intelligence agencies. For Khrushchev, the crisis weakened his position within the Soviet government. Many in the Communist Party viewed his retreat from Cuba as a humiliation, ultimately contributing to his removal from power in 1964. The crisis demonstrated the immense pressure placed on world leaders in moments of geopolitical peril. 10. The Cuban Missile Crisis in history, a defining Cold War moment. The Cuban Missile Crisis remains one of the most studied events in Cold War history. It was the closest the world ever came to full-scale nuclear war, highlighting the devastating potential of superpower conflicts. Historians continue to analyze its causes, decisions, and consequences, drawing lessons for modern diplomacy. The crisis reshaped US-Soviet relations and set a precedent for future nuclear negotiations. Today, it serves as a reminder of the importance of diplomacy, restraint, and communication in preventing global catastrophe. The lessons of 1962 remain relevant in an era of ongoing international tensions. What do you think of our video? Let me know in the comments section below. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to hit that like button. Also, subscribe to our channel before you go. Thank you for watching.